When we come in as non-founder managers, I mean, we bring the energy, the passion, the zeal, and they couldn't distinguish us, from founders because we had the same, spirit and drive and ability to inspire, our audiences, meaning investors and employees and partners and customers and all of that. After a while, you're part of the fabric, of the company. We're not that sterile ivory tower figure that kind of sits, very isolated, never talks to anybody. That is just absurdity, right? I mean, we're extremely immersed, and we're at the leading edge of the company, right, where the fighting gets done.
From Foundation Capital, this is B2B as CEO, a podcast about the startup journey, about going from idea to IPO, and growing from a founder into a CEO. On each episode, I speak with notable CEOs and founders and get their stories about what it took to build a company of scale and become a leader in the enterprise. I'm Ashu Garg, a general partner at Foundation Capital. My guest today is the one and only Frank Slootman, and he's going to turn the founder mode versus manager mode debate on its head. Frank's track record in B2B land is iconic. He took Data Domain from pre-revenues to a $2.5 billion acquisition by EMC. He led the IPO at ServiceNow, and when he left the company, it was worth $34 billion. Frank then took Snowflake public, and the company was worth over $70 billion when he retired earlier this year. After 3 successful CEO stints, Frank isn't buying Silicon Valley's fairy tales about founders. His leadership style combines a manager's prowess with a founder's passion. Frank epitomizes what some might call owner mode. Frank, why don't I just jump in and talk a little bit about the founder mode debate that has been the rage on social media over the last month or so. Paul Graham really stirred up a debate when he talked about founder mode versus manager mode. And one of the things that really struck a chord for me was when you said that's too simplistic. Why is that? And what are the nuances that get lost in that framework?
Well, it's more that we're stereotyping, and look, anytime you're stereotyping something, I'm sure you can find a few cases where they apply really well, but you start looking at the whole spectrum, of things that are out there. You're like, well, this is a bit contrived. We're defining modes. And by the way, it's fun, especially for podcasts and publication. We can put a label on it and all of a sudden we got a brand new discussion. But the reality is, this is not a new discussion, right?
And one of the things that you have done at ServiceNow, at Data Domain, at Snowflake most recently, is while you came in as a professional, CEO in these situations, like you really, imbibed and embodied what Nikesh Arora calls sort of the owner mode and the owner mindset, where it never felt like the company was being run by a professional manager. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what you did to sort of really infuse that owner mindset?
Yeah, when I was sort of reading through all the articles about these two stereotypes that we're talking about, uh, I just don't recognize it. Okay, because when we come in as non-founder managers, I mean, we bring the energy, the passion, the zeal, and they couldn't distinguish us, from founders because we had the same, spirit and drive and ability to inspire, our audiences, meaning investors and employees and partners and customers and all of that. After a while, you're part of the fabric, of the company. We're not that sterile ivory tower figure that kind of sits, very isolated, never talks to anybody. That is just absurdity, right? I mean, we're extremely immersed, and we're at the leading edge of the company, right, where the fighting gets done. and we have a lot of following. And and then in the beginning, it's always really, really hard because the transition from that early nostalgic stage to, oh my God, this new guy's coming in and he's gonna kick some ass and all of that, and he's gonna take away our toys. And we have to grow up and we have to work hard. Just remember, ServiceNow is a San Diego based company. They like to surf before breakfast and make the perfect latte and all this kind of stuff. And Silicon Valley was sort of the evil empire to the north, type of thing. But once and also, we confronted very, very hard issues in the beginning, a lot of staffing type of problems. So that sent shockwaves to organizations. We know that. I've done it over and over. But once we get through that, and we start to sort of settle into our form and to how we're going to do things, then things get better and better. And I'm telling you, by the time I left 6 years later, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. And one of the reasons was we had been extraordinarily successful. People never imagined, how successful this company, had become and how it changed their station in life. And that's very rewarding and satisfying for people like us, because we're not the founders, we're not the creators. We're there to maximize the potential, that the company has. So you need both. Now, can founders do that? Anybody can do it, but not everybody can do it. So
I think that's so well said. Anyone can do it, and there are founders, you know, who scale and scale sometimes to hundreds of employees, sometimes to thousands, sometimes to hundreds of thousands. And there are also many founders that need someone like you to come in and sort of be hand in glove with them to make that happen.
yeah, I personally had tons of exposure to founders who had absolutely no business being CEOs, and I probably have had more exposure to that than sort of professional CEOs that came in and that were absolutely a bad fit for the job. So look, you can come up with examples for either side of the argument, which is why I find this way of characterizing the debate is not incredibly helpful. Not to mention that this really is a conversation that's gone on in Silicon Valley since the beginning of time, which is, can founders be CEOs? And I still talk to founders today they're asking me, do you think I can be a CEO? And I'm like, my question is, do you want to be? you know, so you got to start there. In other words, do you want to be? Because if you want to be, you need to become a student of the role, because it's different, right? You can't be doing your old job when you're doing your new job. One of the big differences between founders and professional CEOs or operator types, like I've been, is that we cannot have reality distortion the way founders have. And by the way, reality distortion is a very useful thing. I mean, this is what Steve Jobs always talked about. Hell, he wouldn't do anything if he didn't have reality distortion. You got to see the world differently. But by the time, and you wouldn't start a company, if you didn't have reality distortion. But by the time you're going to start running a place, for scale and breakout and velocity, and now you need to have intellectual honesty. You need to see the world the way it really is.
Not the way you want it to be. And you can do both. You still want to keep the dream alive, but there is a reality that you have to confront every day.
Yeah, but if you got your CEO hat on, you better not be bullshitting yourself, okay? So, or the rest of the company, or your board, or all these people. And by the way, this is sort of one of the super important things about being a CEO is intellectually integrity and honesty about what's really, really happening. Not some version of the truth. And by the way, it's hard. You have to drive for it and for that intellectual honesty about everything that going. This is what I see go bad in a lot of companies. They can't handle the truth. Okay, so in other words, when you have sales problems, it's always, oh, let's get a new sales VP. Well, maybe the product sucks. Okay, but that's a conversation that they don't want, because hell, the investors came in, loved the tech, loved, all of it. And all of a sudden it's like, well, product market fit's not working, which is why we can't sell it. I mean, you know, um, lousy salespeople can sell a great product. I've seen that over and over again. I used to refer to Snowflake as a 2-year-old golden retriever, because you dribble them out and everybody wants one. But the opposite is also true. A great salesperson cannot sell a mediocre, lousy product.
In one of the earlier podcast episodes, Mohit Aaron, who's the co-founder of Nutanix and the co-founder and former CEO of Cohesity, said so eloquently. He said his definition of product market fit is when the average salesperson can sell to the average customer without any support from headquarters. Like that's product market fit. Until then, you're still trying to figure it out. So I'm going to change topics a little bit. One of the things uh, that CEOs have to manage is they have to be in the details, and at the same time, you know, no great executive wants to be micromanaged day to day, and so that balance between staying deeply involved but still being able to sort of empower talented executives is a hard one for all CEOs, founders or otherwise. But it's especially hard for founders because very often they've never been executives themselves in the past. Can you Any thoughts on that conundrum?
Well, it's a style issue. Okay, micromanagement is obviously it's disempowering. It's people sort of looking at everything, second guessing it, maybe redirecting, and people will leave your office going like, what just happened here, and then it happens day to day and day in and day out, and the relationship is no longer on a good footing. And I'm an absolute believer in being highly engaged in the details. But how you do that is really what makes the difference, right?
Can you give an example?
Yeah, I can give you many. I mean, I've gone on record a few times, and people have taken me to task on it when I've said that being a CEO is a highly confrontational role. But they think that confrontational means then grabbing people by the lapels and slamming them against the wall and yelling at them, all this kind of stuff. That's not what I mean by confrontation. Confrontation is about confronting issues and situations. When you see something where you go like, you know what, this is either not good, it is not good enough, or it can be better, right? And then you start talking to the team and the people responsible and say, hey, and you start bringing them along in your thinking. This is why I'm saying this. What do you think, right? You're trying to get them to the same place where you are because they're not seeing it, but you are, right? And getting into the details happens as a side effect of having this conversation. Why couldn't it be this way? Why couldn't it be, and it's just you're driving them to a higher level of aspiration on whatever topic is going on. It can be the simplest, stupidest things, right? And I often start this conversation. How do you think that things are going? I'm not telling them you suck or things are terrible. No, how do you think things are going? Let them talk, right? And then you can say, well, what about this? What about that, right? And all of a sudden, the perspective has opened up and changed. So the challenge is bring them along into thinking, because then it's not confrontational. They don't experience it as confrontation. They experience it as engagement, right? And obviously there's finesse and subtlety, but it's also, you're dealing with people, right? You don't want to destroy them because you want to build them, not bring them down, right? Um, so I spent all the time, and because one of the things that you do as a CEO when you talk to your direct reports is, hey, how's the team doing? How's so and so doing? I mean, we're okay right now. Are we going to be okay a year from now? Why do we think a year from now we're going to be twice as large? Why do we think we'll still be okay? Because here are some of the concerns that I have, that I'm seeing. And I also talk to them about they need to grow in their roles, because people have a tendency to go sideways. They rinse and repeat. They keep doing the same things. You can't in a high growth company. You need to become a different version of yourself. I'm trying to help them think through that. What does that look like? What does your organization look like a year from now versus what it looks like today, right? What is the evolution? So, in other words, stimulate their thinking. Challenge them. To think about, hey, next week let's talk about what this would look like, what we would do differently, staffing wise, roles wise, and so on. So is that confrontation? Yes, it is, but it's it's dressed up in a way that it engages people in a process. And by the way, that's all the time, every single week. It's a very dynamic thing.
Not one time. It's literally, it has to be part of the fabric of every conversation you have. I think you put it really well, and it is the willingness to push, but push by asking questions, push by setting expectations, and there's a balance. You don't want to tell, but you also want to sort of, take people out of their comfort zone and move them into a zone that feels a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'll give you another example of what has happened to me many times, right? So, I ask about, for example, let's pick a sales organization. This has really happened to me many times, and I go, "How's so and so doing in this geography?" Right? Like, well, because I'm obviously asked the question because we're not doing well, So, uh, but so in other words, but then the sales executive reporting me goes like, "Well, I can help him." Okay, and it's like, okay, you now have the relationships, incorrectly. He or she needs to help you. You not help her. You need to lean on her. They don't lean on you, right? You got the relationships inverted. You can't grow as a company if you're the one that needs to help them with their job. And he says you got, and then the lights go on. They go, oh my God, all I'm doing is trying to shore up their shortcomings. I have the wrong person, right? And it's just a perspective change that helps them get to a different place in their thinking about the situation. It's human nature. I can help, I can fix it. Well, you shouldn't have to. Okay.
I think that's so well put, and I think it's human nature to avoid ripping the band-aid because there's short-term pain. If you fire someone, you're going to have you're not going to have a butt in the seat for some period of time. You're going to have to rebuild pipeline. On the other hand, if it's not working, it's not working. You're going to have to do that one day, so you might as well do that today and take bite the bullet.
I always say to people, look, people see this. You may think that nobody sees this, but they see it. And by the way, they're questioning your leadership. They're questioning why you're not moving, right? So your leadership is at stake now because you're not moving or you're slow to move, right? Because everybody's watching, everybody is talking. That's the nature of organizations. So your leadership is a real valuable thing, and you're going to establish it at every turn and every opportunity that you have. So you really don't have a choice in it. I mean, you're not in a, you know, this is out in the open. Okay. And by the way, I mean, it even gets talked about outside your organization. How sales organizations are, they're all talking to each other, different companies, salespeople in different companies, right? So you want to be a leader, man, you got to be on these things big time.
And one of the things that when people talk about this founder mode versus manager mode, they worry about sort of losing connection with the ground reality. But the way you keep that connection, as it sounds like it, based on what you're saying, is you have to engage on the real issues. If you're talking to your VPs of sales about the individual managers they have, and to the managers about the AEs they have, like the ground reality will surface. It's a natural consequence of the nature of the conversation you have.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's sort of a bigger thing because if you sit in your ivory tower and you rely on layers and layers of organization to bring reality to you, you're getting played, right? So I always spent enormous amount of time, in the field. I'm selling shoulder to shoulder with the salespeople, but I am face to face, in the ugliest situations, the most difficult situations. I always tell the people, don't take me to a place where they're going to be blowing smoke up my tailpipe. I want to go to a difficult place where they hate us, where you can't get in. Ask for a meeting where we can't get to somebody, because then we know when I come back to the office and said like, hey, I saw 5 accounts. Here's what I heard directly from customers, not indirectly through layers and layers of managers. This is how you have credibility, and this is how you can be a leader. So you drive yourself to the leading edge, of where reality happens.
Frank, I was preparing for this. I was listening to some of your other interviews, and you've quoted Theodore Roosevelt's "The Man in the Arena" speech a couple of times, uh, and it sort of triggered the thought. Are there other leaders, whether it's him or others, that have really inspired you? Other examples that you'd like to share of leadership that have helped you define your leadership skills?
I actually attributed the book that we wrote, Amp It Up, to the man in the arena, and it's actually the whole text. That was actually a speech he gave. Forgot the name of the speech, but it was in the Sorbonne in Paris in 1910. But it's an incredibly inspiring thing. Somebody asked me, why did you attribute the book to the, you know, and I'm like, well, because that's who this is for. It's for the man and or the woman in the arena, right? And there's lots of people in this world who are not really in the arena. They're either observers or they are consultants or agents or or they're VCs. they provide they provide capital, but there are some people who are in the arena, okay, and they are very very special people, and that's who this is for. And there is a very very strong line there. And I'll add one more thing to it. I occasionally get asked to talk to a graduating class at some elite business school, whatever it is, in Stanford or all these places, and invariably, at the end of the session, they ask me, "Is there a bit of advice you have for the graduating class?" And I'm like, "I do, and you're not going to like it," and they're all looking at me like, "Oh my God, what is he going to say?" But I say, look, I said, you all have elite educations, okay, and you have a .edu email address, and it'll be on the top of your resume. You'll have many job offers, big bucks. Your parents and your siblings will be incredibly proud of you. But they're all consulting jobs with Bain and McKinsey, and people like that. Yeah, I do think that people are a little bit afraid of the arena as well, because like it is a gloves off, bare knuckles world. Okay, it's brutal, and that's where reality lives. The economic reality of fighting for an acceptance of your product where it becomes viable. Right. I mean, the word viability, we use that all the time. Right. Lots of companies out there. How many of them are viable? Not that many. The vast majority never become viable. We pretend they are, right, and we hope they are, and we keep working on them. But what's viability really? Okay, and it's a brutal thing, right? And it's like, if you are, I think you have to subject yourself to that test, as a business person. That's the pitch I make. Of course, they're looking at me like, "Are you kidding me?"
Do a real job? Why the hell would I want to do that?
I got this fancy education. Yeah, my parents are expecting me to do this. I'm like, yeah, you're going to have an easy path to pretty quick earnings, but you'll never know whether you have what it takes. You'll never know, and that's exactly what the man in the arena said. You won't be among the timid souls. Neither know victory or defeat.
That's so well said. Yeah, Frank, I'm going to go back to your, ServiceNow experience where, when you stepped in, as you rightly said, there was a great product. You were seeing customer pull, great product market fit. And at the same time, there's a lot that you had to do to sort of step up the game. Can you talk about sort of how did you instill that sense of urgency around sort of the changes you wanted to make?
Well, it wasn't just a sense of urgency. I just manhandled that company in the most brutal way, and not because that's just how I do it. It's just because it was borderline ridiculous. I mean, there were five people in R&D, or at least five people that mattered. For a company that's pushing 100 million, right? And then the founder is really the only guy who could really fix shit. Um, we had a cloud, if you could call it that, which was a single tenant cloud, which is really a hosting service.
Good old ASP.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. And it was, as Fred said, he said it's a used Dell server in a closet that's our cloud, and they were kind of proud of that. But you know what? I had the CIOs of GE and ING and UBS calling me, because the thing was up, down, sideways like a yo-yo. We didn't know how to keep people up and running, because every hosting was a one-off, and everyone that went down or sideways on us, so it was nightmarish. And by the way, this is 2011. Okay, we didn't know what clouds were. There were no people that knew how to build a cloud. Okay, I mean, Amazon was just still very very new in its evolution.
And Salesforce was a small company at the time, so it's not there weren't many examples of multi-tenant.
Well, Salesforce was probably the place where we all looked towards, saying like they know the best, but we were immensely challenged. I mean, I didn't opening up my email at 6 a.m. every day. It was just like, oh my God, now the world will, I mean, it was crisis non-stop. And the problem was we didn't know how to fix it. Okay, because who are you going to hire? So I cycled through quite a few people, and attracted all kinds of help and consultants and this, that, and the other thing, everything we could think of, and all of that. And I mean, ServiceNow is still a single tenant cloud to this day, but we managed through it by homogenizing the stack so much that you can actually run a single tenant cloud almost like a multi-tenant cloud because everybody is identical. So when you have a problem, it's not like this is a one-off. That either problem either exists across all of them or it doesn't exist, at all. So in the end, we wrestled it to the ground. But and I'll tell you another thing. I mean, the company had taken in lifetime, $13 million worth of capital, and only half of that really went to the company. The other half went into private investors' pockets, and it bootstrapped itself all the way from there. And when I arrived, they had put $50 million in, from operations on the balance sheet. They had cash on the balance sheet. If you can imagine that, okay. But how do they do that? They do it because they starved the company, absolutely starved. So you can be. And by the way, I said, how many quota carrying salespeople do we have? 16. How many did we have at the beginning of the year? 16. Okay, when a company had doubled, but they had the same number of quota carrying reps. It's like, oh, sales productivity is great. Yeah, I can imagine it would be, but not for the for the right reasons. So so what we see a lot in Silicon Valley that companies are massively over resourced. This is a company that was literally starving from anemia. Okay, so I damn near doubled the size of the company in almost, in probably 3 to 6 months. Certainly no longer. I backed up the truck. I got into a really bad tiff with EMC because a lot of people from there wanted to join, and obviously they didn't take kindly to that, which I can't blame them for. But we were the one company that proved that you can take people out of a storage company and make them successful in enterprise software, which before then people didn't believe it. Those guys are refrigerator salesmen. They can't do enterprise software. Well, hell, they could, in our world. So we made them, So I mean, there's many stories. I'll tell you another thing. I mean, the company had no patents and no patent applications when I joined, not one. And we were, running with a product, publicly. So in other words, it was out. It's a little late to start, filing for patents when you're in the public domain. So, there was a belief in the company that intellectual property was just nonsense, and all of that. But we started to very, very seriously threaten some very large companies. And of course, they find out we have no patent protection of our own. And man, we got sued by BMC and threatened to be sued by HP, and we all paid them off with enormous numbers. It's all public information. Okay, you can go back in time and see that. But this went on for a year and a half, where it felt existential to us, is that we can lose absolutely everything. And this is where boards are really important, right? They should have said, you may not believe in intellectual property, but you need a patent portfolio to defend yourself. We're not going to use them as an offensive weapon, but they will scare off a suitor if they think they're going to be countersued. And you have to protect your inventions. But they didn't do it, and the company was doing well, and everybody is applauding, and the investors are happy. But and it's like, so I always tell companies, make sure you talk about this shit in every board meeting. Okay, you give updates. What's going on, because you can't skip those steps. And so even a company like ServiceNow that looks like from the outside like an enormous success, and it was, but did we have challenges? We had existential challenges that were very, very hard. Yeah.
Maybe, switching gears to sort of Snowflake. When you joined Snowflake, it was a very different situation, I suspect. Can you sort of talk a little bit about that and maybe contrast the choices you made in terms of actions there versus ServiceNow?
Yeah, I mean, Snowflake was literally the inverse of ServiceNow, in the sense that it was massively over resourced, and I saw they didn't want to show me the P&L.
And a lot of IP, maybe too much IP, not enough sales.
Well, they did have a ton of IP, so that was good, because there's plenty of companies that would have loved to have taken us to task, and we had two founders coming out of Oracle, so you can sort of do the math on all of that. But they didn't want to show me the P&L because they're like, oh, he's going to get scared. I'm like, well, sooner or later I'm going to have to see this, and of course it takes like 20 seconds. You go, like, holy shit, what's going on here? I mean, and the whole unit economics was like this doesn't make any damn sense at all. I mean, this looks like an expensive hobby. Sales and marketing is 160% of revenue, and they're at $100 million run rate, roughly. So I mean, but again, the attitude back then was, I mean, you just blow tons of resources and hope that some of it sticks, right? And we're not of that school of thought. We're very disciplined growers and scalers, of companies. So I mean, gross margins were like mid 50s. I mean, it's worse than a hardware company, back then. Today they're in the high 70s, but it's painstaking work to get it there, and go on about all the things you have to do. And obviously our operating efficiency has massively increased. But running a cloud company is not that easy economically, because you run on somebody else's platform, right? So they need to be paid. So it's actually, ServiceNow is a more profitable company from a unit economic standpoint than Snowflake. So Snowflake was doing well, and again, when a company's doing well, everybody is cheering and happy, and basically fat, dumb, and happy, and they're not very critical. And of course, in the end, they were start getting nervous and worried, which is sort of the reason why they obviously came knocking. And it's the other thing that was very, very different. ServiceNow had swim lanes, and we expanded the swim lanes massively, from help desk replacement, ticketing, to really every single enterprise service domain, which is why it's a $10 billion revenue company today. And we're in customer service, we're in HR, they're all $1 billion revenue segments, and all of that. But what happened to Snowflake is very, very different. And what's really important here, all these companies are completely different technology, different era, different competitors, different. Um, but in Snowflake, we had very nice swim lanes when we first joined, and we were replacing things like Teradata and Oracle warehouses and so on. And we just benchmark specific queries, workloads that people had, and say, okay, you run it the way you run it now, and then we're going to run it side by side, and you're going to see how much that costs and how fast it runs. And people were oohing and ahhing. It was like orders of magnitude faster, cheaper than they'd ever seen before, and it was all as easy as, and it was it's just a beautiful product, right? And like I said, I used to refer to it as the golden retriever, because the 2-year-old golden retriever, because everybody wants one once they've seen it. But what of course has happened over the last 5 years, the swim lanes disappeared. Because basically what we did was no longer an industry, it was no longer a market, it was just one workload. I mean, we had to massively expand the platform to handle the full spectrum of workloads that a database can't perform, from analytical, batch, to streaming, to transactional, to search. I mean, and anything that a database does, people, want to do. They don't want to have 5 engines hanging off the back and basically stitching an application at the front there. So we're all racing to build these capabilities, even though our core credentials, of course, was around highly scaled batch analytics, was completely optimized for that. And of course, this is so hard in databases, to make it, sort of multi-operational, modes. And then, you get AI coming over the top, which is like, hey, we just talk to things now, and it can handle unstructured data like nobody's business. They're going to talk to like a human, right? So, and by the way, we're still in the workload spectrum is now, much better understood and laid out, and all of that, and in full development, and being used. But the effects that AI are going to have on data platforms is going to be enormous, right?
Since we started talking about AI, I want to keep going on that thread, and then we can come back to Snowflake. As you've seen what's been happening in the marketplace, both in your capacity as CEO at Snowflake, but more broadly, when you look around you, uh, what gets you excited at the highest level?
Well, the thing that gets me most excited is that I've been in the world of computing since the days of mainframe, or maybe right after. I sort of entered a world when we had open systems, which is sort of the once we sort of moved on from mainframes in the late '80s, we had many computers and open systems running Unix and all this kind of stuff. So we've seen computing platforms and programming languages and network interfaces and user interfaces just change, but they were incredibly technical, incredibly arcane. The interaction with systems was just brutal. In the 80s, we got relational model and structured query language, which people at that time thought was an almost human language, right? But we developed user interfaces because the regular people need to be able to interact with the system. But now it's like, look, that's all going to go away, because we're even going to question the whole utility of the written words. Why do you need that? The printing press. I mean, because if you can talk, you can ask questions and get answers. And so, you're going to, this is not an incremental evolution of computing platforms and architecture. This is really the end of an era and the beginning of a completely new one. And I can't even, I mean, we're still obviously in infancy, because one of the problems with the tech is, it just, you get sometimes very, very bad answers to questions.
Yeah, it takes time, like any technology, whether it's the cloud or it's the internet. It takes years for it to sort of stabilize and be ready for scale.
Yeah, but the thing is, when you're working with unstructured data, okay, you may be forgiven, but when you're working with structured data, if I ask you, who's the top rep in Detroit, you better have the goddamn answer, okay? Not like, oh, I think it's so and so, you know. So
When you ask the same question, you come with a different rep.
no, I mean, look, you need to now be authoritative, for like a system of record on your answers, and of course, that's not there either. Now, are we going to get there? Absolutely, right? But we sort of one of the few useful things that Gartner Group has ever done is this the adoption curve, the trough of disillusionment, and the top of the hype cycle and all this, and that's very true. Top of the hype cycle, and then sort of reality sets in. We're starting to understand how hard this really is. But then we start to slowly, gradually, over a period of years, do very, very fundamental, profound things. And I think we're sort of starting to get into that mode.
So, do you think we're past the trough of disillusionment, or do you think that that's ahead of us?
I'm associated with a couple other companies that are doing AI and contact centers, and different places where we believe AI is going to just completely reset the economics. You get fully autonomous systems. We're gonna be talking to AT&T instead of sitting in one of those hard coded IVR systems. The absolute hell. If I got to call Sirius XM and I want to just add another card to my goddamn plan, how hard is that, right? So that's coming, but I'm telling you, it's not as quickly, easy, and slow and fast.
It's going to take time. It's certainly going to take a lot of time. But the point you made, which is one of the most profound things about AI, and more specifically generative AI, is it completely changes the interaction model. You went from bits and bytes, literally assembly level code. When I first, if you go back in the 70s, as you rightly said, SQL seemed like almost a human language at one point in time. To today, you can describe what you want in a bunch of tools, ChatGPT and otherwise, can generate code for you. That's a profound change. I think the fact that the interface is a conversation and you don't have interfaces in the traditional sense is a profound change.
But you're going to have the same types of growing pains and issues, with things like AI. But here's the other part on the output side. How does the system actually output? How does it generates content, right? It can talk. But there's going to be a new emphasis on visualization of information. How do I do that, right? Organization of data. How do I do that? Or we don't have organization anymore. I just ask for it and it just finds it.
Exciting and very early. Exciting and very early. So, one of the things I want to dig into, just given your ServiceNow experience, is the impact on the application ecosystem. Uh, like, most technology waves, you first see a lot of activity in infrastructure, and definitely Snowflake is at the cold face of that with Databricks and others. Uh, but eventually, The even larger market, once you start putting these things into production, is in the application interface. Application categories change, and I hear two very different schools of thought. The if you listen to Mark Benioff, he will argue that, hey, Salesforce is going to be the largest producer of AI applications, and whether it's Agentforce or Einstein, pick your favorite buzzword from Salesforce, and they will reimagine their product suite with AI. That's one end of the spectrum. You know, I'm biased. I invest in startups. The startup view is, look, the new systems of agents or systems of intelligence, the systems of agents are the new systems of intelligence, and over time, they will replace the systems of record. That's the other end of the spectrum. What's your take on this ecosystem?
This is one of my favorite topics because incumbencies have been incredibly persistent in our world, right? I mean, to the point of, it's very hard to challenge somebody like Salesforce. I mean, people have tried. It's been an incredibly durable uh, company. But the same is true for ServiceNow and Workday and SAP and all of that. But I think that the challenge that they will be incredibly challenged. I think in the next 5 years. Pick a time frame because I see companies now, and I'm sure you're seeing it as well. I mean, they're doing stuff with so little resources, so incredibly quickly, and they're bringing products to market, literally within weeks and months, and have people using stuff with very, very limited resources. We've never seen that before, right? And I'll pick on CRM for a second, but it really applies to all of them. It's like, look, I don't want to update a record. I'll just talk to it, then it will update the record. I don't care how it do it. I don't want to see a database. I don't even know what a database is anymore. All these layers, are completely opaque to us at this point. And I just ask a question like, who's my top rep in Detroit? In other words, you better get the answer right to that question, you know. And then we have much more sophisticated questions, analytical questions, on that. But I think Salesforce is correct in saying, yeah, we got to reimagine the company. I think that's exactly the right word. But if you are just incrementally changing the company, I think you can be severely challenged. I mean, if you do the economics, by the way, and all these enterprise suites, we know exactly what it costs us because we have all that data. And Snowflake being a multi-billion-dollar company, and we spend a lot of money on this stuff, and it's like we think the economics can be vastly improved in these areas. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things that I see is in many of these categories, the incumbent systems of record were very focused on structured data. At some level, Salesforce is a interface on top of, and I'm picking on Salesforce just because it's an example. I think it's true for a lot of the application. It's a structured UX on a relational table. Whereas in the world of AI, you have voice, video, images, emails. You know, there's a very large spectrum of data, all of which is applicable, and it doesn't all sit in Salesforce. It may sit in Salesforce. It may sit in Zoom. It may sit in your email systems. It may sit in Slack. And I don't think there is. It's not even clear to me that there is a system of record 10 years from now.
Yeah, look, I mean, the other modalities, beyond structured textual data. I mean, for example, if I see a resume and say, find me 10 more like this, if that's a query, okay. Uh, that's the sort of thing, right? And you can figure out in law enforcement how that will apply to video surveillance and all these kinds of things. The other modalities are going to just blow our minds, in terms of the type of questions we're going to be asking of systems that we can't even imagine, right now. But yeah, I do think the incumbencies are going to be challenged, and look, that's true for almost everybody. We got to stay very, very quick and light on our feet. You can still see the beginnings, of computing in today's systems, right? And it's going to be very, very visual, very language, natural language centric. So it's a beautiful thing. I never thought I'd see this day in my lifetime because it has been such an excruciating journey, right? but it really feels like it is upon us.
It is definitely going to be a fun time in the next couple of years for applications. I mean, I tell people that there's a world where there's a whole new generation of AI applications with an interface that looks very different. One of the things you said early on, which really spoke to me, was when founders, want to be CEOs of the companies, you ask them, like, do you really want to do this? Is this what you want to do? Because if you do, you have to become a student of leadership, which is very often a different job, or most of the time a different job from what most founders have done. What other advice do you have for CEOs who are looking to become students of leadership?
I mentioned this early in our conversation. You need to become committed to intellectual honesty, the ability to see things the way they really, really are. Which is you may go like, yeah, that's a given. No, it's not. I mean, the way humans are, they delude themselves every day of the week. We all do it because we create realities that are pleasing or that we can live with, right? Because it's just too hard to face your demon. But then, you're going to fail because you're not going after the real problem because you're not willing to see the problem as it really is. And I will tell you, in all my years managing businesses, I cannot tell you how many times I've stopped the meeting and say, guys, let's take a step back here and really look at this and examine all the possible explanations of what's going on here, right? Because we're very quick to jump to conclusions. Oh, I've seen this, especially people with MBAs from fancy schools. I've seen this before, or I'm a VC. I've seen this in another company before, and this is what's going on. And we want to close very, very quickly on the analysis.
Frank, over your career, you've worked with so many investors and VCs at different stages. And, you know, most founders do it for the first time. Any any advice you have on what they could do to better manage their relationship with their investors, and in particular their venture capitalists?
Yeah, transparency, and what we just talked about, intellectual honesty. I took this to a fault myself. ServiceNow was, all our companies were incredibly successful. And I would go to a board meeting and I would tell them everything that's worrying me and what's wrong and what needs to be done. And they came out of the board meeting bewildered. I'm like, what are you talking about? Aren't things going great? I'm like, yes, but okay, I need to give you some of the hell between my ears. Okay, I mean, you come in here once a quarter, and you're going to live my hell, for a couple hours here, as opposed to I'm going to give you some fair weather, presentation about how great things are, and as founders often have the tendency to blow smoke up their tailpipes and just tell them a very, beautiful galvanized version of reality as opposed to no. Create the transparency, give them the level of detail so they can understand what's really, really happening in the business. And it will help them be more credible. And, they will never have to have two versions of the truth, and remember what the hell they said.
Frank, as we wrap up, you've had such a remarkable career across such a broad spectrum of companies. I mean, when I think about Data Domain, ServiceNow, and Snowflake, I mean, just three very different and all individually remarkable organizations. How would you sum up in your own words who is Frank Slootman?
Well, I haven't spent too much time talking about some beautiful set of words. It's just not who what I spent my time on. People always, what's your legacy? The word, I don't use the word legacy. I just find it like, it's like, do I really, want to? So I'm just, my ego is substantial, but it's not big enough that I'm caught up in those ways of thinking. I don't, I'm in the service of the enterprise, and I view myself that way. I do the best that I can, for the people that are there, especially the employees. I want to bring them to another level. That's, by the way, I always start off when I first get acquainted, with the employees. Say, look, I am here to better your station in life, and they look at me like, "Are you kidding me? This is a CEO. He says he's going to do that," and I'm like, "I am going to, and I'm going to die trying." Okay, and they're like, "Holy shit!" And by the way, this is what builds fabric and organization. They're like, this guy has our back. He knows what's important to us, and I mean it. And we have changed people's station in life on a massive scale in all these companies. Okay, and that is the single most enduring, rewarding aspect of doing this work. It's not how well we did personally, which is also great, but after a while, it's like how many people have we helped in their families.
And it gives you the opportunity to impact so many. The leverage you get, and for each one of those across generations.
Yeah, that's you do that. I mean, you have something to lean on, like, hey, I wasn't just in it for myself.
Frank, thank you so much. This has been a remarkable conversation. I feel like we could have gone on for another couple of hours, but I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you.
Totally welcome.
That's our show for now. You can find past episodes and subscribe to future ones wherever you get your podcasts or at foundationcapital.com. And if you like the program, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps others to find the show. B2B as CEO is a production of Foundation Capital, an early-stage venture capital firm with over $3 billion in committed capital and 29 public companies to our name, including Netflix, Lending Club, TubeMogul, and Sunrun. At Foundation Capital, building companies is in our bones. I'm Ashu Garg, a general partner at Foundation Capital. I'm passionate about helping B2B entrepreneurs who are trying to solve hard problems. So if this podcast speaks to you, if you're a technical founder who's interested in scaling an enterprise startup into a massive business and scaling themselves into a true CEO, drop me a line.